Most of the world watched in horror as Israel attacked Gaza for 22 days at the beginning of this year. Protests erupted throughout the world. Calls for a halt to the bombings and the attacks on both sides were heard but not heeded. British playwright Caryl Churchill decided to provoke conversation with her response to the siege of Gaza, a very short play but powerful, called 7 Jewish Children. GritTV asked several actors to come in and read the play, most notably Kathleen Chalfant, who then joined us for an interview about her decision to be a part of it and her lifetime work in the theater in such works as Angels in America and Wit.
Tell her it's a game.
Tell her it's serious.
But don't frighten her.
Don't tell her they'll kill her.
Tell her it's important to be quiet.
Tell her she'll have cake if she's good.
Tell her to curl up as if she's in bed, but not to sing.
Tell her not to come out. Tell her not to come out even if she hears shouting.
But don't frighten her.
Tell her not to come out even if she hears nothing for a long time.
Tell her we'll come and find her.
Tell her we'll be here all the time.
Tell her something about the men.
Tell her they're bad in the game.
Tell her it's a story.
Tell her they'll go away.
She can make them go away by keeping quiet, by magic.
But not to sing. Tell her this is a photograph of her grandmother, her uncles, and me.
Tell her her uncles died.
Don't tell her they were killed.
Tell her they were killed.
Don't frighten her.
Tell her her grandmother was clever. Don't tell her what they did.
Tell her she was brave. Tell her she taught me how to make cake.
Don't tell her what they did.
Tell her something. Tell her more when she's older.
Tell her there were people who hated Jews.
Don't tell her.
Tell her there are still people who hate Jews. Tell her there are people who love Jews.
Don't tell her to think Jews or not Jews.
Tell her more when she's older. Tell her how many when she's older.
Tell her it was before she was born and she's not in danger.
Don't tell her there's any question of danger.
Tell her we love her.
Tell her, dead or alive, her family all love her. Tell her her grandmother would be proud of her.
Don't tell her we're going forever. Tell her she can write to her friends. Tell her maybe they can come and visit.
Tell her it's sunny there.
Tell her we're going home.
תגיד לה שזאת האדמה שאלוהים נתן לנו.
Don't tell her religion.
Tell her her lots of greats granddad lived there.
Don't tell her he was driven out.
Tell her. Of course tell her. Tell her everyone was driven out and the country is waiting for us to come home.
Don't tell her she doesn't belong here.
Tell her, of course she likes it here, but she'll like it there even more. Tell her it's an adventure.
Tell her no one will tease her.
Tell her she'll have new friends.
Tell her she can take her toys.
Don't tell her she can take all her toys.
Tell her she's a special girl. Tell her about Jerusalem.
Don't tell her who they are. Tell her they're Bedouin, they travel about.
Tell her about camels in the desert and dates.
Tell her they live in tents.
Tell her it wasn't their home.
Don't tell her home, not home. Tell her they're going away.
Don't tell her they don't like her.
Tell her to be careful.
Don't tell her who used to live in this house.
No, but don't tell her her great-great-grandfather used to live in this house.
No, but don't tell her Arabs used to sleep in this bedroom.
Tell her not to be rude to them. Tell her not to be frightened.
Don't tell her she can't play with the children.
Don't tell her she can have them in the house.
Tell her they have plenty of friends and family. Tell her for miles and miles all around they have lands of their own.
Tell her again, this is our promised land.
Don't tell her they said it was a land without people.
Don't tell her I wouldn't have come if I'd known.
Tell her maybe we can share.
Don't tell her that.
Tell her we won.
Tell her brother's a hero.
Tell her how big their armies are. Tell her we turned them back.
Tell her we're fighters.
Tell her we've got new land.
Don't tell her.
Don't tell her the trouble about the swimming pool. Tell her it's our water. We have the right. Tell her it's not the water for their fields.
Don't tell her anything about water.
Don't tell her about the bulldozer.
Don't tell her not to look at the bulldozer.
Don't tell her it was knocking down that house.
Tell her it was a building site.
Don't tell her anything about bulldozers.
Don't tell her about the queues at the checkpoint.
Tell her we'll be there in no time.
Don't tell her anything she doesn't ask.
Don't tell her the boy was shot.
Don't tell her anything.
Tell her we're making new farms in the desert.
Don't tell her about the olive trees.
Tell her we're building new towns in the wilderness.
Don't tell her they throw stones.
Tell her they're not much good against tanks. Don't tell her that.
Don't tell her they set off bombs in cafes.
Tell her. Tell her they set off bombs in cafes.
Tell her to be careful.
Tell her we need the wall to keep us safe.
Tell her they want to drive us into the sea.
Tell her they don't.
Tell her they want to drive us into the sea.
Tell her we kill far more of them.
Don't tell her that.
Tell her that. Tell her we're stronger. Tell her we're entitled.
Tell her they don't understand anything except violence. Tell her we want peace.
Tell her we're going swimming.
Tell her she can't watch the news. Tell her she can watch cartoons.
Tell her she can stay up late and watch Friends.
Tell her they're attacking with rockets.
Don't frighten her.
Tell her only a few of us have been killed. Tell her the army has come to our defense.
Don't tell her her cousin refused to serve in the army.
Don't tell her how many of them have been killed.
Tell her the Hamas fighters have been killed.
Tell her they're terrorists. Tell her they're filth.
Don't.
Don't tell her about the family of dead girls.
Tell her you can't believe what you see on television.
Tell her we killed the babies by mistake.
Don't tell her anything about the army.
Tell her. Tell her about the army. Tell her to be proud of the army. Tell her about the family of dead girls. Tell her their names, why not? Tell her the whole world knows, why shouldn't she know? Tell her there's dead babies. Did she see babies? Tell her she's got nothing to be ashamed of. Tell her they did it to themselves. Tell her they want their children killed to make people sorry for them. Tell her I'm not sorry for them. Tell her not to be sorry for them. Tell her we're the ones to be sorry for. Tell her they can't talk suffering to us. Tell her we're the iron fist now. Tell her it's the fog of war. Tell her we won't stop killing them till we're safe. Tell her I laughed when I saw the dead policemen. Tell her they're animals living in rubble now. Tell her I wouldn't care if we wiped them out. The world would hate us is the only thing. Tell her I don't care if the world hates us. Tell her we're better haters. Tell her we're chosen people. Tell her I look at one of their children covered in blood and what do I feel? Tell her all I feel is happy it's not her.
Don't tell her that. Tell her we love her. Don't frighten her.
Welcome back. You're watching GritTV. Well, you are now going to see me utterly gush. Gush over an actress who I think is one of the most extraordinary professionals working in the field. She brings every ounce of her caring, her heart, her life to every role, it seems, even when those roles are as various as, well, Ethel Rosenberg in Angels in America and a cancer-struck professor of done poetry in the extraordinary Margaret Edson play Wit. Her name is Kathleen Chalfant. She is never not there for the cause when there's a cause that deserves fantastic performing arts. Kathleen is there, whether it is the war, the economy, the Israeli invasion of Gaza, the causes of justice around the world. You always show up, Kathleen. You're extraordinary. To give people a sense of just how engaged you are right now on the screen and on the stage, how many things are you doing right at this minute?
Well, let's see. I'm just about to go off to the Guthrie to do Tony Kushner's new play, which has an extraordinary title.
I was going to say, please tell us the title.
The title is called The Intelligent Homosexual's Guide to Capitalism and Socialism with a Key to Scripture.
I can see it on the front of the theaters now.
Wonderful. So it's a nod to Shaw, it's a nod to Barry Baker Eddy and all like that. And I've just finished doing A Delicate Balance in Washington, and I get to be in a movie that's so much fun. I have a really nice part in Tony Gilroy's Duplicity. And
no kidding. I mean, I've been talking to people about that film with Julia Roberts and Clive Owen, and I said, you know, their performance is one thing, but the star performance in that film is really yours. It's extraordinary how you shine in that piece and how you're the one person who isn't duplicitous at all, and in fact sort of knows exactly what's going on throughout.
Sort of, but we shouldn't say, because if we say that, then you can't.
Well, no one will know what the
I
it
know,
is.
They know what's going on.
So anyway, talk a little bit about how you came into theater, and let's talk about theater in a minute, but how did you come into this?
Well, I think I meant to be in the movies. I grew up in California. I'm one of those California children. My mother came from England and ended up in San Francisco, and my father came from Iowa and ended up in San Francisco, and they married during the Second World War, and I was born in 1945. And so, like all children in California, I thought I was going to be in the movies, and I particularly wanted to be in the cowboy movies because I both liked horses and thought that maybe I could get somebody to kiss me, because girls were often kissed in the cowboy movies. But so I sort of thought I always wanted to be an actor. And when I was in you know, in the Christmas play and in the high school play and all like that, and I took a little pause. When I went to college, I went to Stanford and studied classical Greek for reasons that are much too complicated to get into. And then when I got out, I went back to the theater, and somehow I missed the movies. I don't much look like a person in the movies. And my husband and I went to live in Europe for a while, and then came back to New York. And there is a thing about the theater. The theater you can make, it's a handmade thing.
It's an extraordinary thing. I mean, in this moment of multimedia everything and news of the world coming to us at all times from every direction, the theater is a phenomenon in the sense that you go into a little black box, we the audience, randomly selected, and you, the performers, manage to conjure a place, a time, a cast of characters with long histories.
It together.
With nothing but words.
We do it with words and, you know, sometimes lights flashing, but the lights aren't necessary. What is necessary is the communion between the audience and the actors, because the thing that's made is the thing that's made between us. We all agree to, but we all know that we're all just regular people the same size in the same room at the same time. And we all agree to that thing they call the suspension of disbelief, whatever that is. But it's a kind of magic, and it seems to be an essential, it's one of the essential human activities. It's a particular form of storytelling. And you can make it. And, you know, now as we're tumbling back into the barter economy, the theater seems more and more sensible. It's ecologically sound besides everything else, because you can do it yourself.
You just have seen you perform a part of Caryl Churchill's new extraordinary short play, just about 8 minutes long, 7 Jewish Children. Talk about that play as a piece of theater.
It's an extraordinary piece. It's called 7 Jewish Children, a Play for Gaza. And in the 7, when you see the play on the page, it looks like a poem, like free verse. And it is, in a way, free verse, written in 7 stanzas. And those I didn't count the lines, but there are maybe the longest stanza is maybe 20 lines long. And in those 8 minutes and 7 stanzas, we go from the middle of the Second World War to a few weeks ago during the Israeli incursion into Gaza. And it is absolutely clear all the time exactly where we are, and the compression and clarity of the history that's spoken and the emotional charge of that history is, I cannot imagine any other form in which it could have been so clearly expressed. And Caryl Churchill has for some time been interested in this kind of verbal and emotional compression, how to say the most with the fewest words. And she manages to do it in an extraordinary way, which is not ever abstract.
You talked about the sort of unwritten contract between the audience and the performer. What's the director's role in that?
Well, the director's role in making the play is that when you're in the play, I mean, it's easier if it's only one person, but even so, when you're in the play, you need to be in it. You haven't any idea what it looks like. So people often say to actors, so how did you like such and such a play? And we often respond, I don't know, I've never seen it. Because you see it from the inside. You need someone, the director needs to give form in the way that a conductor does to a piece of music, and to act as the surrogate for the audience who will come, to make sure that you are making sense, and to make sure that the shape of the play is the proper shape of the play, and that everyone in the play is in the same play, because sometimes that's not true.
Now, there are parallels, of course, in the world outside of the play, and you do a lot of work in the world outside of the play. I wasn't kidding. You've been involved in many, well, you call yourself an actor and an activist, and we traveled together to Lebanon.
We did. I call myself really an actor, and I am proud if people call me an activist. My true belief is that I don't do half enough, but I'm glad to be able to do something sometime.
Are there skills, and so often what we have trouble with, particularly in our media, as we're talking about tough topics, like the topics addressed in Caryl Churchill's play, we have trouble creating that environment of conversation, that reaching that unspoken contract that you talk about. Are there lessons we could learn from theater or directing or acting or writing for the theater that might help us have these conversations better outside of the stage?
I think so, and I have exactly the same problem as everyone else, because since we all know that our position is right, and it's baffling as to why other people don't get it, you tend to pound people rather than collaborate with them in the discovery of the truth. And the thing is, I think the lesson to be learned from the theater is that the discovery of an exchange of, or the discovery of the truth, such as it is a collaborative event, and it happens in the community, and it is more important to be effective than to be right. It matters that we all, my favorite example of this, I've gotten to be in all sorts of astounding things, but perhaps the most moving and the thing that I was involved with for the longest time was Angels in America, Tony's play, which, when done all in one day, took 7 hours. And by the time we got to Broadway, we were no longer singing to the choir. And what I always thought was that at least for 7 hours, there were people in that theater who thought something that they hadn't thought before.
Well, that gets to it, that you're eliciting thoughts from them. And is that the difference between good political theater and bad political theater? Because when you're in bad political theater, you're being lectured at.
Yes.
But when you're in a Tony Kushner play, it's quite the opposite.
Well, I think what everyone does, a great work of art, each one has its own particular magic. I think one of the things about Tony's writing is that it's so astonishingly beautiful. And it's like, it's sensually satisfying in the way that, say, Mozart is sensually
To say, you mean?
satisfying.
And to hear.
Yes, to hear. To hear. I always thought that the thing itself, it sounds like a silly thing, but the object of the play was a beautiful thing in itself, and its beauty seduced people into, and so that it was a successful work of art that had about politics. But politics, of course, is about us living together in community. That's what it is. That's the 3.5 years at Stanford in Greek, talking about the poets, you know.
Tony Kushner said about you, of course, that you know how to live, well, Kathy knows how to live through your writing, I mean, his writing. She gets the way a character comes into existence through the writer's words, and like any great actor, she's fearless. Are you really fearless?
I have no idea. That's a very moving thing to say. I hope that that's true, because I do believe that that's what the job is. The actor's job is to make manifest the writer's intention, and to communicate that intention to the audience. And then if that communication is successful, you make another thing, which is the memory of it. And I think, and it is political action. It is, but the act of the theater is a political act. It is a community.
How so?
It is a community we've made. We agree, there are many agreements we make about being in that room and in that place and exchanging these thoughts and ideas and moments of beauty. The other thing that the theater does is that the other reason that it makes a wonderful model for community is that there is something for every single member of the community to do. And without all of it, none of it works.
How is it different in film? I mean, you've done plenty of films, you've done lots of television, but you keep coming back to the stage. And you wrote about film as being or movies. One of the other has been the temptation of the devil or something.
Movies are the great temptation of the devil.
Why?
Because unless you happen to look at it. But when you're making the movie, the the movies are much more, are oddly hierarchical anyway. It's like an industrial production. From the actor's point of view, the job is much simpler, because in the theater, everyone on the stage is responsible for where people look, either passively or actively. In the movies, somebody else decides what people look at. If you are the thing being looked at, whether it's for 2 minutes or 5 hours, you are quite literally the center of attention, because the engine, the thing that produces the energy, the camera, is directed right at you. And it's a kind of, you know, you're sort of awash in narcissism as all these people look at you like
so
this.
That's what you meant by it sort of sparks a different kind of rather unsettling ambition.
Well, yes, and another kind of pleasure. The pleasure of it is, I'm not convinced that humans, even now, are organized to either see or hear themselves. I mean, we all have the experience of listening to ourselves on tape and wondering who that is. And it's much more horrifying if you have to look at yourself, because you don't look like you're meant to look. So the narcissistic part of it isn't viewing the result. The narcissistic part of it is the moment of offering up your soul to be sucked up by this thing, and having 200 people or 10 or 2, depending on the size of the production.
Well, I'm glad your soul wasn't sucked up, but I will say there were many of us who were disappointed, much as we love Meryl Streep and much as we love Emma Thompson, that they got your roles in Angels
No
of America.
more disappointed than I. That's the way it goes.
Well, it's the demands of commercialism, I guess. But talk about that a little bit, as you're an actress who has taken on challenging roles for the female culture. You performed with your head bald as
my no longer young body naked. And I won't do that anymore.
You won't? You drew a line?
I did do that in Kinsey, however, in the movie.
Yes, you did. Well, are you consciously trying to signal to people, actually, we can expand our ideas about age and gender and beauty?
No. I mean, no. It makes me happy if it's happened. I was one of those women. I grew up in that generation of women who sort of always knew we could do it. You know, there is a way in which feminism and the success of feminism, such as it has been, and the entrance of women into the workforce and all, came as a much greater shock to men than it did to women, because we always knew we could do it. So that, you know, the societal effect is different. So it was, and I have been always supported. I was supported by my father. I've been supported by my husband. My son, by some miracle, does not believe that he is superior by an accident of birth.
I bet there was more than a miracle.
And well, it probably. I mean, I'm moved by that. He has a very collaborative marriage and all. I've been very lucky in the things that have been offered to me.
I should say that you've got so much on your plate. I think you forgot that you're also performing in Vita and Virginia.
Oh, that's right.
Which reminds one that there was Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West in the 20s and 30s and 40s, well, 20s and 30s, I guess, really being women who could do it even then.
Absolutely, and who did whatever they, who did in fact do whatever, they did what they chose to do. Both of them, each of them in very different ways. Yes, and in fact, I'm going to do, Patricia Elliott and I did a Vita in Virginia on Monday nights at the, sadly, the greatly lamented Zipper Theater, which is closed, last spring, and we're doing it at Duke University on Sunday as the close of a big Bloomsbury.
It's a beautiful piece of work.
Big Bloomsbury event.
You talked about miracles. Do you think we'll see a miracle, coming back to the subject of the Middle East? Can you see a way out? You play the characters so brilliantly, and they're so brilliant because they're so true, with all that history, with all that pain on so many sides.
I think that if there is a solution, it is a practical solution. If, as happens in the play, it is a battle about whose child you'd rather see dead, there's no hope for any of us. It's a property dispute. It's a practical issue. It comes out of a disastrous policy decisions made, as we all know, since the practical part of it, since the end of the First World War, exacerbated by the guilt of the victors in the Second World War, and a bad solution to all of those problems was made. There isn't any good, completely just solution to this problem. There should be a practical human solution. If we think of it in those terms, we might be able to find a solution. If we continue to do what has gone on sort of passing for certainly the last 10 years since, or is it 12 years now since we were in Lebanon together. The terms in which the attempts to solve this problem have been carried on are hopeless, and they all end in arguments that have to do with whatever it was God chose, and whoever's, and you know how many dead grandparents there are, and whose children we'd rather see dead.
What's our role in this?
Our role as
yours and mine, Americans.
Our role, well, our role as I think yours and mine, everyone's role, is to honestly try to find reasonable, decent, just in the terms that are possible solution, and to remove God and dead children and guilt and religion from the discussion. And as Americans, because we we pay the taxes which enable the circumstance to go on, and we have had a bias toward military solution. I think that it is important in what is, God willing, excuse me for bringing God into it, a slightly less bellicose time in the world, to try to pull the bellicosity out of it, to try to, and to understand that it is our responsibility to solve it.
Kathleen Chalfant, thank you so much. You can see her right now in Duplicity. I'm serious, best thing in the movie. And her play, the latest Tony Kushner play, will be opening at the Guthrie in previews this spring. Thanks so much. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Laura.